Hi everybody and welcome to Mike's Hidden Histories. On a previous TikTok, I told you about the Irish fairies, the Aos Sidhe, who lived in fairy forts in Ireland. And now I want to tell you about some individuals who, loners in fact, from the fairy kingdom, who might be less benevolent and a little bit more threatening. And the first of these was the puka. And the puka was uh, a mythical figure, I suppose, who could change their shape. Very often they appeared as a horse or a hare, or a dog or a cat, and sometimes as an oldish man. And as growing up as a child, I heard stories of people meeting the puka, usually in isolated places. So be very careful if you're ever traveling in isolated places or in hills or hollows or whatever, you might come across the puka. Sometimes, in fact, they appear as a horse who can talk, and they might want to take you for a ride. They generally don't cause harm to you, but can give you a lot of frights as well. And the puka, as children, we were often frightened and told if you don't go to bed or whatever, the puka will come and get you. And there are a lot of places in Ireland associated with the name puka. Paulo Fuca, Cara Fuca, Bohora Fuca, right around the country. So these were all places, Ahafuca is another one, all places that are associated with the name of the puka. They are an intrinsic part of Irish folklore, and in fact, also in other countries. They're called Pogue in the Channel Islands and Brittany. They're called Bacca in Cornwall, and PYC Puca, I think, in Wales. So they're part of the Celtic mythology and tradition. The second individual from the fairy kingdom that you mightn't want to meet is the Banshee. And the Banshee means the lady of the mound, or uh, a lady fairy. And these were really harbingers of doom and gloom and associated with death. Or if you heard a banshee wailing in the woods or nearby, usually at night time, you would be very afraid for your own future or a future of a family or relative, because they appeared and started crying and wailing before that. Now, they had an appearance sometimes of young women, but generally they were seen as old, haggard lady with kind of yellowish, reddish eyes, long clothing, white clothing. My own grandfather is certain, in fact, in 1937, on the night of his brother's death, that he witnessed and heard a banshee. So it was part of Irish folklore and very embedded in Irish tradition, certainly in country areas when I was a child, and long before that. And so that's the story of the banshee. Don't go out to meet one, because they bring bad luck, particularly telling you about a death in the family. The story of the changeling is well embedded also in Irish mythology, and in living memory, in my living memory, I was aware of stories of changelings from my grandparents' or great grandparents' time. Now, a changeling is where really the fairies come and, out of revenge or something, take your baby and replace it with a fairy baby. Now, in Irish tradition, going back the centuries to medieval times, it was often, if a child was behaving mysteriously or got ill, or even was born with deformities, it was often an excuse, I suppose, to say that the fairies came with your and changed your baby for this baby. Now, up right through the 19th century and even into the early 20th century, this belief in changelings was very, very widespread. In fact, young boys were dressed as girls until about the age of maybe 3 or a little bit later, maybe 4. And there are photographs like these which show children, boys dressed the same as girls. And that was apparently to confuse the fairies. They wouldn't take particularly the boys. Now, sometimes changelings were in adults as well. Um, my father told me of a neighbour who was convinced that his wife had become a changeling. Now, she obviously had Alzheimer's or dementia or something, but he was convinced that she had. And one of the ways of having the changeling leave was, which this man did, was when his wife was being buried in the graveyard, he struck the coffin with his walking stick 3 times. And that was supposed to kind of bring his wife, even though dead, back into the coffin, and the changeling would leave. Strange as it seems, it was very embedded belief in Irish society. So much so that there is a tragic case in 1895 of Bridget Cleary, whose husband burnt her, really, believing that she was a changeling. And he was found guilty of manslaughter, jailed for 15 years, and then went to Canada afterwards. But it's a really, really tragic story, and I'll tell you about that sometime soon as well. So changelings were a belief that went back really to the Middle Ages. The Dullahan was effectively a headless horseman, and you could meet him as well. He had his head under his right arm, was usually grinning. But if you saw this Dullahan appearing, you want to put your fingers in your ears, because the name he calls out is the name of a person that's going to die. I heard the story of a person hearing the Dullahan calling out a young fella's name on a roadside, and within a week that person had died at that particular spot on the roadside. Now, these are probably stories, but the Dullahan was a tradition in the northern parts of Ireland, around Sligo, County Sligo and County Down, that was prevalent in those areas in particular. The Grog is another benign individual that is in folklore in the northern part of Ireland. Now, this was a guy, apparently the Grog came from Kintyre in Scotland, and the story and the individuals themselves became prevalent in the northern part of Ireland in the 17th, 18th and 19th century. And these were like little goblins. They lived in caves or in hollows in the ground. They're quite sociable creatures. They were covered in hair, long hairy. They were ugly little fellas, but friendly enough, and they always liked to talk. So they'd often apparently turn up at houses, and it could become a nuisance around the place. In fact, they might think they're helping you around the place. These are, but in fact, they became a nuisance after a time. They were small in stature, maybe 3 feet high, quite ugly. A tradition, in fact, that you would find, like the goblin tradition in other countries. And apparently, the one way to get rid of them, they hate the clergy. So you get a clergyman to turn up, and he'd pack up and he'd be gone and would never come back. And the final individual I'd like to tell you about is the leprechaun. Now, the leprechaun has really been taken over by Hollywood, I suppose. Darby O'Gill and the Little People and so forth. But traditionally, they didn't wear green at all. They were in red. They wear a red hat, red clothing, buckles on their shoes, little black shoes with buckles. And that was traditional. They carried 2 pouches, and if you saw a leprechaun mending his shoes, they were shoemakers. They were always fixing shoes. You could be in luck, because he'd have to give you a wish, a gold. But he had gold in one pouch, and he had silver in the other pouch. In one of them, the minute you got it, it turned to dust, and the other, the silver, actually just when you got your hands on it, it flew back into his pouch again. So you could never win with these guys. The leprechauns. That's all from now from Mike's Hidden Histories. More next time.